right, we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brian Fortier. I'm Senior Vice Provost of Budget Planning and Administration. And on behalf of the Provost's Office, the Chancellor's Office, and the Office of the Senior Vice President for Finance, thank you all for coming today. This is our second installation of Meet the University. And apparently you are the brave, hardy souls, because at the last minute, a whole bunch of people said, oh no, it's drizzling in Massachusetts, and switched to the live stream. So we have with us today Chief Davis, who is Chief of Police here at Northeastern University, and Todd Kaplan, Associate Director and Emergency Manager for the university. And they're going to be talking to us about safety here at Northeastern and in the world more generally, as we think about Northeastern becoming more and more of a global university and having a presence in multiple locations. There's a lot that this team is thinking about in terms of keeping all of us safe and the roles that each of us play in making that happen as well. So we're going to hold questions to the end. For those of you on the live stream, we are taking live stream questions as well, so you can send those in throughout the session, and once we open for Q&A, we'll intersperse live questions alongside those that come in via our live stream viewers. So with that, I will hand it over because I think they have a lot to say. We'll get it in time.
Well, good morning for a few more minutes. Hi, everybody. So I thought I'd start out a little bit today, because we're going to do this as a team, obviously. Me and Todd are going to take turns here, but to give a little bit of background on me and what led me to think about this particular title, and moreover, why the logic model of the public safety approach to this university. So, and it came to me kind of as an epiphany, because I think as you go through your career, you kind of reflect back on why you made the choices that you made and certain pivot points and what has led you to think the way you think about your job today. And so recently, I was asked the question, why did you become a police officer? So I kind of have my pocket pet answer I pull out, you know, and, but this time I kind of took a pause. I took time to reflect on why that is, and I reflected a bit upon my childhood. I grew up in St. Paul, in the Midway area, Midway neighborhood, predominantly African-American neighborhood at the time. And I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and what I watched happen in my neighborhood was my neighborhood slowly deteriorating, right? It went from a neighborhood that was cohesive, that was together, that was really crime-free, dare I say, and I watched it deteriorate as we kind of toggled into the late 80s, and the crack epidemic of the time kind of took hold. And kind of a visual representation also, you know, that city had beautiful, like, you know, tree canopies as well, right? So, and then Dutch elm disease came and took all the trees, and so it was kind of symbolic of kind of the erosion of what happened in the community. And it got me thinking. It got me thinking and really being more observant as a late teen as to who's witness to this, right? Who's acknowledging this kind of deterioration along with me. And I noticed that in these neighborhoods, or in my neighborhood, there were us, the people that lived there, and the police. Everyone else seemed to be a tourist, right? I saw us kind of trying to deal with the struggles. I observed the police trying to do the best they could do at the time, and that's kind of it. So that kind of sparked my interest in terms of next steps in my career. So in college, I made the decision to apply to become a police officer with the city of Minneapolis, which led to my kind of second epiphany, because as I joined the city of Minneapolis Police Department in 1992, they were on the verge of going into the worst years in that city's history when it comes to crime. In fact, in 1995, they were called Murder-Atlas. For a city of 340,000, we had a murder rate that was, you know, 3-4 times the national average. And so now, being a police officer, I began to become more curious about why neighborhoods change. And more importantly, what are the hallmarks of the neighborhoods that haven't changed, right? So fast forward into my career as the chief of police of the city of Brooklyn Park. It's the sixth largest city in Minnesota. It's a city that's 50% diverse, 25% foreign born, And now I had even more of a compelling interest to kind of figure out the science behind it. What are we missing in policing? Because the traditional kind of academic approach, the kind of peer-to-peer study, wasn't giving me any answers. I just wasn't satisfied with that. And so, oddly enough, as I was becoming a cop and really becoming my own police officer and the kind of cop I wanted to be in the mid-90s, a researcher called Robert Sampson, named Robert Sampson, at Harvard, was doing a study in Chicago called the Project of Human Development in Chicago Neighborhoods. And he was looking to understand the different variables of juvenile crime there, which was high, several times higher than the national average. And he identified some of the attributes and some of the conditions by which these kids existed in and how that's contributory to the violence that existed. But he came across something else about neighborhoods, which really was the epiphany, which began to kind of draw me into kind of what is the remedy? What is the approach? What does it look like when neighborhoods thrive as opposed to when they deteriorate? And what he found was that he studied 80 different neighborhoods. And he found that certain neighborhoods, everything being the same socioeconomic status, same demographic, half those neighborhoods, not quite half, a good portion of those neighborhoods had half the amount of juvenile violence than others. And so he sought to figure that out. And he found 3 characteristics within those neighborhoods, which became the bright spots, which gave us kind of wayfinding signage as to how people relate to one another in neighborhoods, right, that are less violent. One is that people knew people at a higher rate, so they knew one another. They actually had knowledge of who people were in the neighborhoods, right? Secondly, there was a working trust, right? So I know you, and there's a working trust amongst us, right? And the last thing is there's shared expectations, right? So what does that mean in terms of juvenile crime and violence? That meant in those neighborhoods that adults were willing to intervene when they observed children, not their children, but children misbehaving. That saved lives. That changed the dynamic of a neighborhood. And so the phrase, right, the diagnostic phrase, collective efficacy, right, and the behavioral patterns that make up collective efficacy is what really began to explain a little bit of what happened in my neighborhood, right, and a little bit of what happened in the city of Minneapolis, in blocks where, you know, crime was less prevalent, and blocks where crime was rampant. And obviously it helped me in my journey begin to figure things out. So we know about collective efficacy is that it's not just something that is I would say, a dynamic that has any utility in the neighborhood setting. It has something of utility in all of our roles, right? Especially in the workplace. So when we think about what it means to be uncertain, we are typically isolated, right? There is certainty found amongst groups because in groups, everyone has various attributes, abilities, and things they offer, which gives comfort that when something happens, if I don't know what to do, somebody else knows what to do. So for us, when we think about our connectivity to the university writ large, and you'll see this throughout kind of our presentation of how we're connecting ourselves in ways to the university that typically public safety units don't do, we share the same philosophy. Because us, you know, becoming a university system set, it's a collection of individuals, make sure nodes, and those nodes are competencies, or they're waypoints, they're points by which people can connect to, but they represent a competency, they represent a capacity, and they represent a collection of human beings that bring with them their strengths and what they bring to the world to make the world a better place, right? And their ambitions. And so that's what we're trying to do here, right? We understand that safety is a very personal thing and a communal thing at the same time. A sense of safety is something that you feel in community more so than when you're alone. And that really is the point and essence of our work, which is why we do the things that we do. So a little bit about the PD, right? So we are 3 parts. And I really call it a public safety construct. This PD, I think people have a certain idea of what a PD is and what a PD isn't. But we do have a fully operational police department, which is nationally accredited, which is important, right? And in that we have, you know, investigations, we have patrol, we have community outreach, we have what we call a police operations center, And within that, we are constructed to serve the university writ large. Okay, so we don't just serve this campus. We serve all the campuses and anywhere in which our students exist. Emergency management, which Todd runs, is what it sounds like it is in most places. But for us, emergency management means something a little bit more, right? It's not just the creation of plans and to say that we have plans and to say that we exercise those plans. It really is trying to inculcate a sense of ownership amongst people that are part of this community, right? It's an intentional action of that. We are really interested in creating measurable outcomes when it comes to emergency management activities, right? Not just having activities for activity's sake. And the last thing is international safety, which is a competency that is burgeoning and evolving amongst universities across the nation. When Kushal Safi, who runs that, started 5 years ago, there were maybe 30 or 40 people in his position in universities throughout the United States. Now they're well over 100. Give you the idea that universities are acknowledging the fact that the world is a place that requires expert interpretation when it comes to security, in a sense of security, understanding what the dangers actually are. That me simply traveling does not give me a full understanding as to the risks of that place. And so this is a competency that serves us in a very comprehensive way. Not just in the ability to respond if something happens, but the ability to provide you with information, right, pre-departure. The ability to support you beyond safety issues, right? So the focus of international safety is more than international safety. It's to deal with anything that derails your attempts to complete what is intended when you travel. So if you have a certain goal, I want to get this done, I'm here to study, I'm here to do research, I'm here to whatever it is, our goal is to make sure that stays on track. And that's really how we contribute to the ongoing efficacy of the things that happen operationally with the organization. So that's the public safety construct, and we'll talk more about that as we go forward. So what is the philosophical underpinning, right? Here's that word preparedness again. So we do have a philosophy. We do have a logic model we try to infuse in everything that we try to do in a measurable way that moves us down the continuum of preparedness. So if you think about, here is the least prepared organizations, and we can look at the characteristics and behavior patterns of those. And then the most prepared, right? We are slowly moving down that continuum with intention. And that's important, I say with intention, because there's a lot of conjecture in my business. There's a lot of people that simply say the absence of incidents means that you are doing a great job. Not really, right? Things have to be intentionally engineered, right? That you're really going after the elements of preparedness, right? As competencies, and we'll talk about that. But the word means here condition, a condition of preparedness that we can measure, right? And within that, there are three distinct competencies, right? The notion of preparedness, if you deconstruct it and look at how do we measure that, we look at the skill and our ability to engage in activities of prevention, response, and recovery. The easiest one of these to understand is response. People understand that we respond to things, right? We are a construct of response, typically, right? And the way I describe the difference between a municipal police department and a police department like ours is this. If you think about like Boston PD, say, right? Or any large police department like the one I work for, or the one I ran. The work drags the police department behind it. Okay? So the calls for service, the cases that come in, the events that come to town, the things that happen, drag the work and we respond, right? We respond to the event, we respond to the call, we respond to the case. Okay, us, we run a PD, but we're running a private also, right? We are tethering ourselves to a private sector organization, which is a community of intention, which is different than a community of happenstance, right? If you think about just the geographic borders, right, of a community, that people happen to live there, businesses happen to be there, and they may have been there a long time, but that's just what happens to be there. Here we have a community of intention that's global, that's beyond any border set, right? And so we can't afford to be behind the work, right? We have to get on top of the work and understand the work and try to create, with intention, the condition of preparedness. And that's where these competencies come in. And so this is where we begin to assign roles to every single member of the organization. Okay? Everyone has to have the ability to respond, the ability to prevent crime and what that is, and define what that is, and understand it and do it, the ability to respond, and everyone plays a role in recovery. The idea behind the condition on the bottom is resiliency is the condition of recovery, the ability to go back to the original state as soon as possible, right? So we like analogies here, so here's a baseball analogy. I'm not really a baseball fan, but any team sport matters, right? So the field, obviously, is us, Northeastern University, right? And the reason we like sports analogies are because sports are a truth teller, right? I could say I'm a great police chief, as compared to what, right? I'm a squash player. Who knows who plays squash? Nobody? All right, squash is a difficult sport. It is the world's healthiest sport.
So it says.
And it's a truth teller, right? I can say I'm a great squash player, but the truth is in my ability to perform, okay? That's why we like sports analogies. That's why we use this to guide our work a bit, right? So the idea is you have players. Players are all of you and us, right? With equal stake in this place, right? Now players have individual abilities and roles, okay? So my ability is my responsibility. Now, as an entity, right, we can create the support structure for you to gain acumen and ability, right? We can provide you with the balls and the bats and the facility and the coaches, but at the end of the day, it's your focus with intention to become better at your role. Same thing goes for safety. There's no difference here, right? The team, there are units within the university that make up the total university, okay? So, all of you belong to a team of people that you see more often than some of the people in this room, right? So I see Todd more often than I see Brianne, right? We're all on the same macro team, but we're on kind of the micro team. And we have a very distinct role within that and a competency that we have to gain. It's our individual responsibility. And then the tools. So you can see the elements of what makes a successful team in any team sport, okay? The idea is that you have a venue, right? And we have a venue here. We have a beautiful venue, right? We have the individual players, but the individual players have to be beholden to a unit, a team, other folks, right? To become better at their role and then thus become better together. That's the notion of this thing, okay? And it'll make sense here a little bit more as we go through this. So here's our approach to going through, in a comprehensive way, really reorienting the university in this preparedness mindset. So think about spaces. Everyone exists in a space. Right now we exist in a space. Now we don't exist in a space all the time, but we do exist in a space most of the time. Even folks like myself and Brianne buzz around this campus all the time, go to different meetings. We have a home base. We have a space by which we call our own, right? Professors have the same thing. They got their offices and they got their classrooms. The idea is everyone exists in space, and we assess those space for the level of security that space represents. So are there structural holes and gaps in that space? Okay, and then we look at the functions within the space. So who makes up the functions that make up the space? Because the functions determine how the space is utilized. Okay? And all of you make up the functions. And then we look at the competency of the individuals. So this is how we assess. We assess the space based upon its prescribed functionality and the individuals that make up the space. That's how we assess. Now we train in the opposite direction. We train the individuals, that's you, right, to function in your roles within the space, thus making the space more secure. That's the idea. If you think about your work units, you think about the places you work and the people you work with, there are people there that have strengths, talents, abilities, and capabilities, right? We all want to know what those are, right? And by knowing what those are and taking responsibility, going back to how we construct collective efficacy, which I know you, I trust you, we have mutually shared expected expectations, say, we're able to respond and recover quicker and hopefully prevent things from happening. That's what you want. And that's what we call preparedness, right? And in that, right, it becomes the antidote, if you will, to uncertainty. So if I go into an office alone, like the first time you start in a new job site, right, in a new place, you walk into the office, and maybe the person that hired you, you walk in, and it's just you and a bunch of people you don't know. You're uncertain. and things inherently destabilizing about that. Right? So the idea is we have the capability of restabilizing and putting it even in a better state, like welcoming you in. Right? Everyone has their role and responsibility, not only for the I would say the main function and purpose, which is the work, but also the safety and security and well-being is what I call it, of everyone in this space. Okay? So from there, I'll toggle to Todd.
Thank you. I'll throw it. I'll drop it. All right, good afternoon. So to pick up on what Chief Davis was saying is, we're all human beings, we're all individuals, and we all meet crisis in different ways, right? But we all kind of go through the same process, and that's what I'm going to talk through a little bit. And when I talk about crisis, I talk about it on a continuum. Well, maybe it's not a continuum, because I hope there's an end somewhere over here. So on this end, you say, all right, it's raining outside, I don't have an umbrella. That's crisis over here, right? That's the minimal crisis, low severity. And then over here, you have the unthinkable, the societal collapse, and everything in between. So now everything in between, everything, unfortunately, is possible, but most likely not probable, right? All the things that happen in between. Maybe somewhere in the middle there's a fire in the building, or there's I don't know, have to evacuate the subway, right? Those are things in the middle. Not quite the umbrella, but not quite all the way over here. And the way that we look at these things is how we process them. We're creatures of habit. We like our normal. We like when things are happening the way that we want them to, and we like our routine. And as soon as something presents itself that's not normal, we start to have trouble, right? We start to say that's not happening because we hit denial. And I like to say the secret to preparedness is it starts in the mind, because allowing yourself to say, this is not going to happen to me. And that's one of the biggest obstacles in emergency management, by the way. One of the biggest obstacles is it's not going to happen to me. That's not possible. It's not going to ever happen to me. And instead saying, I hope this doesn't happen to me. But if it does, what if? What am I going to do? How am I going to develop myself, right, as an individual, and understand what I can do? How am I going to plan for this? And that's kind of that spectrum, understanding what those different crises that might affect us are. So denial, so kind of that first phase. We then hit a point of deliberation. So if you've allowed yourself to understand that, okay, what if this happens to me? Now you start hitting a point of deliberation. So now it's, what are my options? And maybe a crisis that might be a little bit more relatable is, let's see, if I'm driving on the highway, my car breaks down. I'm on the side of the road. What are my options? It's 2019. That's not as good of a one anymore, because now I can push a button and a tow truck shows up, and I can call somebody on a cell phone, and it's nice and easy. But go back maybe 30 years, right? 30 years ago, I would have to either, all right, I'm going to walk up to the next exit, I'm going to walk back to the previous exit. Am I going to wait for a nice, happy motorist to come give me a ride to a payphone? Am I going to wait for a state trooper? It might have been a little bit different then. I can actually crank that up, the spectrum a little bit of crisis, and say, all right, I broke down in the middle of the highway. That's a little bit different, right? Because now I'm in danger because I'm not on the side. Now I'm in the middle of the highway, right? How am I going to deliberate what's going to happen there? Again, 2019, I push my button and a tow truck shows up. It's a little bit different. But you can even, all the different crises that we face, it's an endless supply of crisis that we face every day. And, you can put a snowstorm in there too. Now that just pushed it up even more, because now people can't see me. So we deliberate. And that's the consideration of, what are my options? What am I going to be able to do? And in deliberation, it's sometimes called the milling around phase. I should say that this is what I call the response arc. Oftentimes it's called the survival arc, if you look at it in textbooks. I like calling it a response arc because it's kind of expanding that scope. Because that umbrella situation, I'm going to survive if I go outside in the rain and I make that. That's what I call response, because everything that we're leading to is action. We're trying to minimize how much time you deliberate and denial, or deny things, and get to action as quickly as possible. You as an individual, you as a department, and so on and so forth. And what's interesting here, so the action here, this is showing somebody conducting CPR, but action, it's a response. It's getting past denial and deliberation and making it to do something, to do some type of response. Now that's very possible. That could be relatable. having somebody with a medical emergency in front of you, have you ever thought about that? What are you going to do? If that's your crisis right now, if somebody went down right there, what am I going to do, right? Am I going to be stuck in this denial deliberation loop of I'm not sure, so I go get somebody, what should I do? And I'm not saying do CPR if you haven't been trained in it, right? Don't do that. Please don't do that. But if I just take out my phone and I hit Safe Zone, I don't know if everybody's aware of what Safe Zone is. Safe Zone is an app that we use here. It's a mobile safety app that if you hit that emergency button on Safe Zone, it's going to notify all the officers around you. I mean, that's great. That's something that you might not see anywhere else. The officers that are outside are going to say, oh, there's an emergency here. They're going to start coming. And what that's going to do is going to notify, it's going to make a phone call. And you're going to call police dispatch, and police dispatch is going to say what's going on. They'll say there's a medical emergency. There's somebody in front of you that's gone down. So they know that now it's a medical emergency. They're going to notify an ambulance. They're going to let the officers that are responding know there's a medical emergency. And now you've helped that person. You've made a beneficial impact to their survival, potentially in that case, right? So that's your action. If you don't know CPR, yes, I understand that. You can get trained in CPR and things like that, but even that's getting you to a response. That's getting you to an action. And that's what's really important, because the more time you take in denial and deliberation, the less that impact is going to be beneficial. So we want to do these things fast. You don't want to get stuck, like I was saying, in this denial deliberation loop. Oftentimes that happens. If you've never allowed your mind to go to some of these crises and say, I hope it doesn't happen, but what if? And if you don't do that, you could very easily get stuck in denial and deliberation and not know where you're going to go if something were to ever happen. And that gets you into the preparedness mindset. So you might be thinking about the medical emergency, but you're already getting your mind thinking that way. So if there was something else that were to happen to you in a crisis situation, you're already getting your mind prepped and primed for that. The worst thing that happens in this loop is inaction, because you're getting stuck in a loop and you can't get to action, and that unfortunately is the response you don't want to have. And how do we do this? We do this through information training and exercise, and I'll go through each of these. And it's not necessarily a correlation to each of those things I was just talking about on that response arc. But what information training and exercise does, it helps build that condition of preparedness. It helps you go through those things and allow you to build up your understanding of these things and reduce denial, reduce deliberation, and get to action. Information. Information and training, or information rather. Let's think of something trending. Identity theft, right? If I read something about identity theft, that's allowing myself to say, I'm not denying the fact that there's identity theft out there. And maybe if I got that phone call from the bank saying, we saw that you opened an account. We hope that you're enjoying your services with us. Please call us back and let us know how things are going. I don't have an account at that bank. They must be mistaken. They got the wrong file. I'll call them later. That's denial. That's denial, not recognizing the fact that something might be going on. And if I had read something maybe about identity theft, I might have recognized that or allowed myself to get past that denial. That's happened to me, by the way. It's something unfortunately very common right now. And if you do get that kind of call, you can put a fraud alert on your accounts, by the way. I'm giving you some news you can use right now. So if you put a fraud alert on one account on your credit reporting agency, they'll notify the other credit reporting agencies, and basically what they'll do if you have to open something, because I leased a new car, they're going to call you on your cell phone, because that's the phone number you give them, and they're going to ask you some security questions. Probably the way it should be normally anyway, but that's how it's going to happen, and now you're going to be able to feel better that nobody can open an account under your name. So that's identity theft, but that's just one case of information. I'll talk about a resource that we have, the Emergency Response Guidebook, that has a lot of information in it as well, that helps you get through these things and think about these things ahead of time. Training. Training is almost taking that the next step. You read something, information, you do that on your own time, you do that on your computer, you can do that on your phone, you do that personally. But training means you're taking another step, because now you're going to something, you're learning from a professional, you're learning from an expert, you're maybe doing something more hands-on. If you think about first responders are in a career where they're constantly training. Because they're constantly training to reduce denial and deliberation so that way their actions are almost instinctual. And if you ever talk to a law enforcement officer, a firefighter, a dispatcher, an EMS worker, they're going to say that denial deliberation, we actually call that hesitation. Because that's what it is, right? That's the hesitation. And they don't have the ability to go through that during a crisis situation because that's their day-to-day. And that's why they constantly train. But if you apply that to us as individuals, and you're reducing your denial and deliberation through training, that's the same thing. They just do that as their career. But if you go through training, you're starting to allow yourself to build up your condition of preparedness and be able to respond to things more effectively. And then exercise. Exercise is something that we do, which is kind of a culmination of these things. If you think about first responders, they're training all the time, so their exercises are usually these big things where they, they clear buildings and they do boots on the ground, big things, all different agencies come together. But if you think about exercise in your own world, in your own individuals, you can exercise these things that you've learned and you've trained upon, and you can bring them into different situations. Say, I want to exercise my family at home. I'm going to sound the smoke. I'm going to tell everybody in my family, I'm going to tell my kids and my wife, I'm going to sound the smoke detector, and we're going to say, this is what the smoke detector sounds like. When the emergency happens and the smoke detector goes off and maybe there's a fire in the house, we're all going to go out to the mailbox. It's just an example. So that way when the fire does happen, everybody knows to go to the mailbox. And the kids don't go to the backyard and the parents go to the front yard and firefighters arrive and they say, I haven't seen the kids now that the crisis has really changed. It's way up on the spectrum because they think kids are in the house and not in the backyard. So I mean, you can exercise the things that you learn, and that all, again, goes back to that denial, deliberation, reducing those things so you can get to the right action, the appropriate action. So there's a few initiatives that we work on here at Northeastern, how we apply it here at Northeastern. The Safety Support Network is one thing that we've developed, and it's really been, it's been successful. I like this program because we have about 60 people in it right now, or that have passed it, I should say, or gone through it right now. And it's an initial training on basic first aid. It's an initial training on how to use a fire extinguisher, emergency preparedness, how to report things. I bet you if I asked everybody in this room, what would you do if there was a small fire that started in here? Grab a fire extinguisher. Great. How many have actually trained on a fire extinguisher? Touched the fire extinguisher, lifted up and felt its weight, squeezed the handle and actually understood the feedback and pulled the pin? Probably not many people. So we get to do that during this class. But those are the types of things, building that type of confidence. Yeah, everybody says, oh, I'll use a fire extinguisher, and I hope you do. I still want you to use a fire extinguisher even if you haven't touched one. But the more that you do these things and you practice these things, you train on these things, the more confidence you're going to have in actually using them and actually doing them, actually making that step past denial and deliberation and making action of putting out a fire, the literal fire in that sense. But we do have a fire extinguisher simulator that we break out for this. That's really interesting. It's a digital fire, so it's neat to use. We do hands-only CPR in that class. We talk about emergency preparedness, building kits, and also reporting, because reporting is one of the most, maybe not one of the most important things, but a very important concept to have, because if you're not reporting, say, a suspicious package or suspicious activity, nobody's going to know about it. So having that confidence to understand what those things are and how to report those things is something that we talk about a lot. And the network concept. This starts to get really interesting. This is where a lot of my research has gone, is social behavior and networking. So the network concept, I'll give another example. I'm sorry, I use a lot of roadway examples. I have a long commute. I live in New Hampshire, so I always think about the road. But in front of me, say, I'm very used to using Waze. I don't know if you're familiar with Waze, but it's a social network traffic system, and you share information on it. And I'm always very used to it. If there's a car pulled off to the side of the road, I'll report that there's a car pulled off. Watch out. It's very useful. But we're starting to get to a point in our society where if there's an accident that happens in front of me, I'm going to instinctually go to Waze and say, there's an accident in front of me. Not so much that I care about the people behind me and the traffic, but that's what I do when something happens. I just go to this network and I let others know. It's a social network. Instead of the traditional thinking of, I'm going to call 911 and let resources know that something's happening. Now, agencies are starting to catch up to this, and you'll see, if you actually dig into Waze, you'll see that Mass State Police are on there, a lot of local police agencies are on there, and a lot of people are watching this. Same thing with Facebook and a lot of other things. People might take a picture of it before they actually call. So they're starting to catch up. Response agencies are catching up, but it's a socialization of information, and it's interesting. So the concept here, the network concept, is by building a safety support network, and not just a training, say, not just a class, but a network of people. It's one thing to have the Office of Emergency Management or some other safety organization blasting out information from the rooftops and saying, all right, it's Cyber Awareness Month. Make sure you use strong passwords on everything that you have and everything that you use. It's another thing to have a conduit that comes from this network that's more local. It's going to be somebody that you engage with on a regular basis, right? It might be somebody that works in your office, in your building, but if we share that information with that network, and now they're able to put a more local engagement flair to it, now what they're doing is, all right, instead of saying use strong passwords on everything you always use, because that's not necessarily going to be well received by everybody, it's, hey, we've implemented this new system. Make sure you're using the strong passwords like this in this new system because this is what we're using now. It's a little bit different, right? It's a little bit different having it come from somebody you engage with every day and somebody that's putting that type of touch to it, right? So that's why we look at this as a network, because then we're sharing information through the local level at the department level. And if they're a safety-oriented group, they can help us. If there's evacuations and things like that, of course, there's the more of the response and the operational side of things too. That's Safety Support Network. I have more information about it if you wanted to join these things. That's at the end. Preparedness Day. I love this initiative. This was our second year doing it this year. We had it last month. And what Preparedness does, also socializes preparedness information. We had interactive exhibits. We had about 20 partners there in an exhibit hall. Very informal. Not many people are going to pick up the phone and call the Department of Homeland Security and say, I have a question, can I ask you a question? But if you have them at a table that you're walking past, you might ask them the question, especially when you have them at a table right next to some other entity and all these different safety partners from internal within the organization, within Northeastern, and those that are around us from state, city, and federal. It has all of this information in one place. So you're gaining that information. You can go to trainings, because we had training sessions during the day on a variety of topics. And we had some keynote speakers as well. This was a saturation because we had it in the Curry Student Center. It was able to have a huge amount of just flowing traffic. And what that did also was socialize. Again, that socialization of preparedness information. It helped us get information out there. It was community-based. And before I move past this, the keynotes were very powerful too. There was one that always, whenever I talk about Preparedness Day, keeps coming back to me. And I was talking about the denial and deliberation to action. His message it was a message of survival. And he was a law enforcement officer. He was a law enforcement officer. And he was engaged in an incident where he was critical of himself, that he hesitated and unfortunately was shot 6 times. I mean, that's the denial, deliberation to action part. That was, unfortunately very impactful for him. I mean, it's obviously not the same for everybody. There's a law enforcement officer, but that really plays into that denial, deliberation, and action. How the timing of that really means a lot for us. So the next thing that's going to show up is a short video on Preparedness Day, because I do like showing Preparedness Day because of how engaging it was and how it socialized the information. So it's just going to be a short video on that. But everything that we're trying to do is exactly what Chief Davis was talking about with that whole preparedness model. Building the condition of preparedness to prevent, respond, and recover, so that way we are more resilient as an individual, as an office, as a department, as a campus, and as a university. Because what was really great about Preparedness Day was it was happening not only here in Boston, but we live streamed, we recorded, we shared sessions with other regional campuses, and they were having their own Preparedness Days. So this was expanding and allowing wherever people existed in the spaces that they existed, they were able to have these types of events and able to have their own Preparedness Days to help reduce their denial, deliberation, and get to action. And they were able to build their own condition of preparedness wherever they existed. And that was really powerful. And that was one of the best things came out of Preparedness Day.
Now, what does that 4 minutes do? In the Boston area, if it happened right here, and you police, Boston Fire EMS would be here and take over.
Travel advice, they're usually very quick to update.
Another one there. In the event of an emergency, that's what.
That was a big concern before actually the
Prepared myself for it, so I was like, oh no!
You have two boxes. And he says, I have 2 boxes of food. All right, yo, holler at me later, and I'll tell you what to do tomorrow.
So that was a pretty challenging time. Certainly something that we will walk away from this incident looking to improve.
Which means that somewhere there's a 14-year-old that has rubber duckies and is able to create something like this. So if this is what a 14-year-old is able to do, think about what a group like Demon Crew or more popular hacking groups are able to do with something like this.
All right. So, as we wrap up, there's a few things I want to make, kind of go back to the beginning of it and just kind of remind folks about why we take this approach. And I think a key point of differentiation between us and a lot of other entities of our type is that we don't see our job as simply the enforcement of laws and rules. Right? And policing writ large in this country is not that. Right? I learned that really early on in my tenure as a young officer in the city of Minneapolis, that I spent much more time just dealing with people and their issues than arresting people, even in the midst of all the violence, right? And so I really don't call this the law enforcement business. I call it the business of human behavior, because we're talking about how humans interact with one another. We're talking about how humans interact with crises. We're talking about decisions that we make. We're talking about our responsibility to one another, our individual conscientiousness. We're talking about all those things. And that really is at the heart of what we're trying to accomplish. One of the things mantras that we have in this business is we live in a world of perpetual dissatisfaction, right? Because that's going to get us to seek to know more so that we can do more for and impact that condition. This is a world which is unpredictable. Human beings are unpredictable, right? But the idea is that the more you're tethered to understanding what's possible, the more you can influence the probability of that occurring, right? So that is our continual charge. So we don't sit here before you today and say we got it all figured out. What we believe is that we have the right philosophical premise and that we're moving towards the right goals. And so the idea here is that 100% it begins with each individual. So all folks in this room, all folks hearing this, understand that it's your own personal responsibility, and you owe it to yourself, but moreover, you owe it to the people that you work closely with and to the greater university community, right? We can't simply rely on one aspect of the construct, which is the professional response, right, to keep us safe, right? We provide the wayfinding signage of individual preparedness, and through all that, you build individual competencies and a collective competence and a shared expectation to leverage that in crisis, and then we play the role that only we can play. And that culmination, right, of conscientiousness and deliberate, intentional building of competency and expectation is how we make this needle move down this continuum of preparedness. So the last thing we'll talk about is really the resources that we have available. And then we'll go.
Yeah, we have time. So some of the resources that I wanted to share with you today, so that way you can, kind of my challenge to you, is to go through some of these things. So information. Our emergency response guidebook is very useful information. I took our plans and took out the bits and pieces of for a reference guide. So what this goes through is what to do in a fire, what to do. I bet everybody in this room, well, maybe some do, but would you ever consider that maybe you got a bomb threat call? No, maybe probably not. Well, you're saying, I'm not going to get a bomb threat call. I work at a desk. I just have an extension at Northeastern University. Yeah, well, the people with ill intent might not want to call the police department. They might not want to call the call center. They might just pick a random number and just call you. So have you ever thought about that? If you answered the phone and it was a robotic voice saying there's a bomb at the school, would you go into denial and say, who is this? No, I'm sorry, I'm going to hang up now. But I'm not saying that that's wrong. But I'm saying if you had some information about the things that you could do during a bomb threat call, or knowing where this guidebook is, now you have something you can do. You have your action. Oh, this sounds like a bomb threat call. Where's my guidebook? It's right here. Oh, okay, I should be writing down the phone number. I should be listening about the background and things like that. So that's information, right? And that's only one example that's off of this. It's a physical guidebook. We did some research and found out that faculty and staff like having a thing that they can actually touch and put at their desk and flip and touch. So that's what it is. But it is also a PDF for those that don't want to have the physical thing. So it is a PDF, and that's the website for it. But we do have the physical flip book. If you're interested, you're more than welcome to email me or come stop by the police department. We have some. Classes and training opportunities. We do have some scheduled classes that we just run on a regular basis. And you can see at safety.northeastern.edu, it's our safety portal. You can see where those classes are happening. What we also do is what we do with our community engagement office is on demand. So if your entire office or department, say, wants to have some type of training, reach out to us, and we're able to offer that to you. But if you were an individual and said, I don't think my office wants to participate, but I want to go to something, those are regular scheduled classes that you can just participate in. And of course, joining the Safety Support Network. There's always that opportunity to do that. We tend to have about 1 or 2 classes continually a month. And sorry, it's a long website. But again, if you email me or if you email any of us, we're able to give you more information on that as well. But that's also training opportunity for you. With that, this is some of our contact information. Chief Davis's information is at the top, and then each of the kind of division heads there are on the board. For contacting any of us, all you have to remember is call 2121, because you can always reach us for that. Anybody in the police department, if you call 2121, that's the non-emergency contact information for the police department, and you can ask for any one of us, and you can reach us. All right. With that, anything else? I'd like to open up to questions at this point.
Don't hold back.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. With your model, you have denial, then deliberation, and then action. So as people who have to think quickly, how are you working on deliberation with the officers and things like that? So they have to make quick decisions about certain situations and their own safety. Are you also dwelling on the deliberation part for the professionals?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, that's something that's always trained. That's one of those things that's a perpetual training, because working through deliberation, knowing what I need to do in whatever situation, and that's not only an officer, right? That could be the dispatcher on the other end. That could be the dispatcher answering the phone, having to understand right away without denying, going through the whole process of what's happening on the other end of the phone. And knowing the process, what are my steps, being able to quickly get to that. Same thing with EMS, all the different response agencies. But it's just perpetual training. And I can tell you from this department and others that I've seen, that training is going on constantly. I want to say on a weekly, monthly basis that there's always training going on. And every time that training goes on, they're building upon their conditions of preparedness, because that's what they're doing, that they're going through those steps They're going through the active threat situations. They're going through medical calls, because police officers are still going to encounter medical calls, but they might not encounter them as often. So that's deliberation. That's how do you get through those? But it is a point of training, and just constant training. And it's just that constant, perpetual.
And I'll add too, one of the things that we hope people will do, which is another reason why the Safety Support Network is, I think, so salient for us, is we want people to go back and have conversations. So people who have been involved in a tabletop exercise set, what is that? Structured conversation about an event, marching you through the process of response, and then putting in, different injects that changes the trajectory of the information, which then should augment your response, right? So the idea behind this is we want to create kind of a cycle of learning and conscientiousness. So for example, if you go back to your work units and have a conversation about, okay, what if someone gets a bomb threat call set? That may spark your interest. And so you connect with Todd and go, okay, I read through your guidebook, I got some questions, right? And so and then you have a subsequent conversation, right? Now armed with more information and the context of the previous conversation. So now you've increased your competency tenfold, right? And so the idea behind this is that as individuals, we want to think about those things all the time, kind of the mental modeling of how we're going to respond. Even the elements of personal safety, talk about understanding your awareness of your surroundings, right? All the things that go into being personally safe, right? Okay, what does it take for you to do that? Well, it takes for you to think about what's possible without dwelling on it obsessively, but understanding that I'm not going to put myself in harm's way unnecessarily. Right? The same thing we want to happen inside this organization. And to the degree by which that happens, even if it's, if you have, let's say you have 3 staff meetings a month or whatever, you take one, we're going to take 10 minutes, we're going to talk about something. We're going to talk about egress during a fire. We're going to talk about a medical response. Who all in this office knows how to render hands-only CPR? Right? We're talking about very short amounts of time. Right? You can acknowledge your current condition, right? Going back to the competency thing, so where does the competencies lie to respond, to prevent, and to recover? And then you plug into us to enhance your competency and go back. So it's really a perpetual process. And the reason that we engage in this also through spaces is because we have a fair amount of turnover. I would say more expansion than anything else right now, right? So we have new people coming in all the time as programs grow, right? And certainly with the students is a fair amount of turnover, but with the staff and faculty as well. So we're constantly, and that's why, the SAT 101, the safety training, the safety awareness training 101 is continually available to catch new people as they come in and to give a refresher. It's never stale information. So it's a process.
I'm curious how you are educating the students and making them aware and being alert to all the things that are surrounding them. Because with all of these crazy shootings that are going on all over the place, how do you make them aware of what they need to pay attention to, and what's your form of educating the students?
Yeah, it is multifaceted and continual, right? So not only touch all the students during freshman orientation, we work closely with student affairs to connect with them in the rest halls. Right, we send out advisories, we send out information. John Farrell and his staff continually connect with students in various clubs and various other, I would say, entities and approaches. The idea is that you can't capture all the students in with kind of one layer and one approach. Right, we see this kind of a blanket. The more blankets you put on, the warmer you become, and the idea is the same thing, right? And so the key message is fundamental, right? Is that you have a tool that's available to you, which is SafeZone, right? You have us which you can connect with, which can give you all the tools by which you can navigate not only this campus but the surrounding community in a more prepared and conscientious and aware way, right? We send out information continually as well, especially when it's occurred that reaffirms the behavior that we want people to engage in. The idea behind when we share information set is to reaffirm a behavioral change. So if something happens, what do we expect from the community, right? And so these are things that we engage in on a regular basis to try to capture all the students. And moreover, we try to do it in a social setting. That's why Coffee and Tea with NUPD, which is, I don't know how many of those we've done, dozens maybe, in which it's an informal way in which people walk up and we're simply sharing information, engaging in conversation, another layer. So it's one of those things where, we're always looking for, additional modalities, but it's a point of real intention for us because we realize that, while our campus, right, by any objective standard is a very safe place, our students navigate the world, right? So it's important when we think about how we interface with our students, not just how they interface with the surrounding community that, that exists around this campus. It's how do they go to a country they've never been to, right? And so that's a point of interface. And really it's the same message, right? You just different bits of information and considerations, right? So by the nature of how we're constructed and how students navigate their educational experience, they're becoming more prepared, right? And that's why we have these three very distinct components. We have the police department, we have international safety, and then we have emergency management. And we plug in, to your experience at various times throughout your educational journey here.
I'll add a little anecdote to that too. With students, it's not only that active threat or those types of emergencies, but reaching out to them on those that are trending, those scams, IRS scams, and all these different things, because those are things that resonate also. We want to socialize that type of information. I was just thinking, you talked about emergency egress. That popped into my head. There was a building that was being evacuated. It was a fire alarm. The fire alarm was going on. And I asked a group of students, they had walked right past an emergency exit and went to the front door, because we're creatures of normalcy. We like our habits. We like going in and out the front door. And I said, you walked right past an emergency exit. Fire alarm's going off. That's your opportunity. You can actually use that exit. And they said, really? I said, yes, of course. It's an emergency. The alarm's going off. You can get out those exits. And they started telling their friends. They said, oh, I wasn't expecting that to happen, but that's socialization of information that happened right there. I really wasn't expecting that to happen. But those types of things, that type of information sharing and everything that we were talking about, that all builds into it.
What would be your recommendation to get ahead of somebody who clearly has just a mental illness? So often in safety situations, I had an encounter with someone in a grocery store who came up to me the other day and just started yelling at me, get out, get out. So I just put my cart away, except Fenway, and I just walked out of the store just as much distance between myself and that individual as possible who was clearly in mental crisis. But if it's a staff member or a student that you see is sort of on a mental decline, you can't necessarily approach that person or that individual. And I don't think students or even staff members really know what we're allowed to do, what we're supposed to do. Instead of just saying, oh, Tom must be having a bad week or a bad month, or if there's a pattern of behavior that just doesn't really feel right or make sense, what would you recommend?
So I'll say that, John and his team do a good job with de-escalation training, which helps to account for some of that. The idea too, though, is that, it's oftentimes your instinctual initial step is the correct one. The thing that we don't want to happen, though, is that you simply, if it's on this campus, say, or really anywhere, right, is just to walk away without notifying somebody, right? Because that's a point by which we're trained to interface with those folks, and look, it's about providing help for people who are going through those acute episodes, and so it is about a combination of things. It's about reading the situation, because not everyone who's mentally ill obviously presents a violent threat, say. But we're not clinicians either, right? So the idea is that your own reading of the situation has to be one of obviously your own self-interest first and keeping yourself safe, while notifying folks that we can come and figure out if there's something deeper there, and certainly mitigating the impact of the episode. I mean, that's it. And it's really important, especially, it's important for every interaction you have, regardless if it's off campus, on campus. But a member of the community in particular, right, everyone's navigating this life at the same time, and we never know how people are going to handle certain parts of stress. And so what we, have experience doing and are pretty adept at doing is really, dealing with folks in that state and helping them kind of de-escalate the situation. So I would say a couple things. It's kind of takeaways. One is you need to trust your instincts on the initial response, and I think in this case you certainly did. Second, there's training that can be provided, which is on the list of things, through Sergeant Farrell's office to help people deal with people in acute crisis. And thirdly, never hesitate to let us know. Even if someone who is not in acute crisis, but maybe it's super cold out, right, and they're walking around in the shorts and t-shirt, and it's like 2 degrees outside. We're just going to have a conversation. right? It could be something that could just be really hardy, right? Who knows, right? But we're trying to figure that out because our goal is to make sure, right, that we're providing that level of service wherever it's needed, and we need folks to be kind of the wayfinding signage to those people.
So I see there are more, but I'm gonna stop us now so that people can get back to work. And and thank the chief and Todd for joining us today, and all of you, and those of you who are live streaming. We hope you'll come back again next month. Emily, who's on next month?
Next month, we have campus planning.
Campus planning, so all about space and where the university is heading. So thank you all very much. I think we're going to stop.